Well, hello and welcome to PM Express. What are we talking about today? Vice President announces tighter purchasing rules. Well, it has always been the case where every government will blame the previous for, constructing schools and clinics with over-bloated budgets, and we always seem to blame the previous government. But then there's this fact that I'm sure, unless you don't want to talk about that, you sometimes compare development done by private companies or private entities, and you compare similar ones done by government, and the price difference is sometimes very, very huge. Now we understand that being that it's government, maybe certain precautions should be taken, maybe certain maintenance service factors should be included in the price. However, the prices seem to be astronomical. I mean, once upon a time, we were told that MTN built a 6-classroom block for 150,000. A similar one done by government was like 850,000. Today, the Vice President is saying that, well, a private entity built a hospital. Government built a similar one. One was $1 million. The other is $25 million. Even though you're not comparing, like for like, you don't know what went into it, the general issue on the table is infrastructure and things being constructed by government seem to be overbloated. And that's what is on the table today. How do we stop it? How do you stop all these things? But they said procurement are going to be tighter. Let's see how we get, if indeed it will be a thing of the past, or this is one of the things where, well, that's how you pay your party faithfuls. That's how you pay the job for the boys, as they call it, so that you can pay back those who help you come into government. Why is government paying too much for infrastructure? Don't go away, we're coming.
At a recent meeting of the economic management team, which the senior minister referenced just a few minutes ago, it emerged that Ghana constructs 60 to 80 bed district hospitals for $25 million. 60 to 80 bed district hospitals for $25 million. That day, even though I don't speak Fanti, I had to say Ebe. Today, you will hear the African Development Bank constructed a 150-bed hospital in Accra a few years ago for 5.76 million Ghana cedis, or the equivalent of about $1.3 million, which was without equipment. But you're talking about a 150-bed hospital constructed around $1.3 million. And even if we have to equip this for $1 or $2 million, the total cost would be some $3 million. So how come we are building 60 to 80 bed hospitals for $25 million? And this figure, the Minister of Finance will know, this $25 million figure does not include the tax exemptions that we are given for bringing in equipment for these hospitals. That is an additional cost to the budget. It is therefore imperative that at the same time as we are seeking suitable investment opportunities to meet the infrastructure gap, the government takes steps to ensure cost-efficient program design and delivery to reduce financial wastage and protect the public's purse. Ladies and gentlemen, it is in this respect that the government, under the leadership of His Excellency President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, has committed to seeking the investment required for the construction of roads, schools, and hospitals, and at the same time maximizing the efficiency of existing expenditure on these infrastructures to ensure value for money.
Well, thank you very much for saying so. That's literally set The premises of the conversation with me in studio is Franklin Cudjoe, President, Imani Africa, Imani Ghana.
Well, Imani Africa.
Imani Africa. You're welcome.
We've gone beyond.
We've gone beyond Ghana now. That's it. And then joining us later will be Ejadin Boating, who's CEO for the Procurement Authority. Franklin, from the horse's own mouth, you were at the seminar.
Yes, the conference. It was
conference
a workshop, if you like.
Okay.
Yes.
So
and kudos to the Vice President, by the way. I think the Vice President has a number of very professional, people who help him deliver. His delivery units is doing well, even though there are a few issues they need to sort out, because they seem to be announcing a number of initiatives after initiative. But they are very professional, and I think these conversations is one of those conversations we should have actually had earlier, but of course, better late than never. My personal commitment towards this process is to ensure that the fallout could be applied to existing contracts, especially contracts that are very controversial. But the lessons were enormous. It's such very interesting lessons that we learned from even the churches, right? When I say even the churches, I'm not using the word even in a pejorative manner. I'm just trying to say that we saw the Pentecost Church, for instance, show us exactly how it is done. And the private sector generally also proved their mettle. And so for me, I think it's a useful exercise. By the way, we told President Mahama, I think in 2014, that he needed to ensure that big ticket projects that had some transformational impact and were obviously heavily costed should be assessed by a group of people called some sort of assessor generals, right? That would assess this project before they actually passed, because some of the things we hear about the inflated projects are quite worrying and quite annoying. And to think that there are departments within each ministry that should supervise this contract but do not do so. And then you have a PPA which is perpetually moribund. You have challenges. Someone can even argue that we probably need the Auditor General to be pre-auditing some of these stuff as well. And I think these are useful lessons we should be taking from the conference. Okay,
let's start with the premises of that hospital statement, and then we'll broaden it. There's a school of thought that thought, look, it was very pedestrian. That a 150 bed was $1.3 million, 60 to 80 bed was $25 million. However, the 1.3 million was empty. You don't know what they're going to fill it with, 25 MRI machines or some space technology. So, was the comparison okay, or you thought it was a campaign platform comparison?
Well, let me start off from the Ridge Hospital, because it was one of the things we got ourselves involved with. In fact, when we saw the figures of Ridge Hospital ourselves during the Mahama administration, we were alarmed as well. We said, well, what is going on here? But comparisons were made with Dangote's 1,000-bed hospital, the police hospital in Ghana, and similar ones across the world. And then we were startled when we got closer and then read the report by valuation, and there's a valuation firm the government always deals with. Crown Agents. We read their report. In fact, we followed through because the companies involved, we knew, were Western companies that had signed up to the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of America and the ABC laws of the UK. So we were a bit startled that if they were found out to be, they were culpable in these overpriced contracts, then we were in serious trouble, and the companies themselves would be in trouble, right? But I personally followed all the way to the US Embassy, met the director for West Africa, who, by the way, was from Ivory Coast, and knew the French company involved. When we got talking, we gave all the figures and all of that. It turns out that the hospital was not, it was not a refurbishment, it was actually rebuilding several parts of the Ridge Hospital. So the cost, which at the time had been said by the MPP to be inflated by over $142 million, was actually not the case. In fact, the figure that Crown Agent had actually reached finalized was about $17 million more. They need to assess the cost per the project, and it was a two-phased project. We found out that the excess value of $17 million, overpriced value of $17 million, was actually to be used for some ancillary work even at the hospital. So you see, and then if you look at the infrastructure that was to be put in there, on the surface, it looks as if it is easy to compare with the likes of Dangote's 1,000-bed hospital or Saudi Arabia, which we found comparators. And that report, by the way, is Joy published it. Our understanding of the rich hospital matter. If you Google it, you find it very thoroughly done. So we came to the conclusion that no, we didn't believe this was one of those projects you could easily say it was overpriced. So the analogy which you gave is to the effect that depending on the cost, depending on the origins of the procurement, the people you were procuring the services from, could actually inform the pricing as well. But that's not to say that we should not have conversations about cost comparisons. In fact, it is in the spirit of transparency that we need to ensure that we have every bit of information about every project publicly displayed on websites so that we can all assess, have panels that will review this project. We need to know the names of the panel, the evaluation panel. We need to know the contractors, subcontractors, the values, so that we in the public can also inform ourselves. That way, somebody will be absolved from the accusation, which I'm sure even the MPP are likely to face. I'm sure we are speaking about Kenny GVG, for instance, which is a candidate for hell, by the way, because that Kenny GVG is an example of a contract that is, how do I put it? It's not just evil, but the contract itself, in fact, it shouldn't have existed, right? You see the escalating sums and all of that. But the point I'm making is, if we had the bill of quantities for each project, and this came up in the conversations. Everybody who spoke, from the ADB people, from the bank, World Bank, through to the Pentecost Church itself that did the presentation, to the hospital administrators who spoke as well, they said at the end of the day, what determines value will be the bill of quantities. Something we've been asking Kearney GVG, whoever they are, give us those documents, the tender documents, but then we'll be able to tell whether this process was shortchanged or not. Recall the AfriWave contract. We spoke and said, oh, it's overpriced, we don't even need it. But what eventually gave the contract out was when we saw the contracting process, the tender process, the evaluation process, where 25 turned into 37, and then they said it was transpositional error. Those things are able to tell you that the process has been shortchanged, and you can then call it out and say, this is wrong. But the bill of quantities gives you more. How much is it really? All the items you've mentioned, how much are they? Can we do comparisons? That's what we are doing at the port with GCNet and the other ones that are operating. By the way, we don't need all the 3 people operating, by the way. I don't think we need that. But the process is that GCNet is able to, if you give a value of a project, they're able to do comparators and say, my brother, you said you bought this mobile phone at 60 pesos, 60 cents. But the thing is $13 averagely. Okay, where did you buy it? You say you bought it in Shanghai, China. It's about in China, there are various forms. The least is about $11. You couldn't have bought this at 60 cents. It's not possible. So you do the comparators, and then you find out that this person is lying. That is the way we should bring, those are the attitude we should bring to our contracting processes.
Let me go to the phone, and we have the CEO for Procurement Authority himself, Agent Boateng. Good evening, sir.
Hello, good evening.
Good, thank you for joining us on the show, and we're looking at procurement processes and how it is that we can get a transparent and fair procurement. It's been a canker, for this country, because it seems, it looks as if it's the way by where, people in leadership would, get their cut, inflate prices, go for the higher ones. That's what it seems like. What can you do, so that we are all comfortable that, listen, this school was a fair price, that hospital was a fair price? Because normally, project that seems to come from government, if you compare it to projects that come from private entities, sometimes they'll tell you it's very similar. This was a 6 classroom block, one was 100,000, the other was 800,000. I mean, is there any way that you can open it up so that the taxpayer is comfortable that, listen, this was a fair price? What can you do with regards to procurement?
Thank you very much, and good evening to your viewers. Yeah, you see, I want us to look at the issues dispassionately here with the kind of explanation I want to offer to form as an education to your viewers. You see, the procurement processes, especially those that we are practicing under the current legal regime, the legal procurement regime, you know, have got a whole of rules and regulations. Now, let me start with open competitive bidding. You see, according to the procurement provision, open competitive bidding is the preferred procurement method, okay, where procurement entities are required to open up all kinds of procurement. And when we say open up, it means they should advertise for interested and potential providers, be they suppliers, contractors, or consultants, to participate in a bidding process. Now, what happens is that when they participate in this open bidding process, according to the regulations and the rules of the game, it is the lowest responsive evaluated bidder who wins the contract. So let us take a scenario where a company has advertised for the procurement of vehicles. And I want to use a specific example of, say, a V8 Toyota 4x4 Land Cruiser. So these requests have come to the open, companies have tendered, and it so happens that the lowest evaluated responsive bidder for a particular specification of that particular vehicle has come out as the winner with a price of, say, $220 as the lowest evaluated bidder. The law does not permit the buying entity to go and negotiate with this lowest evaluated bidder for one reason, for the reason that in the open market, this very vehicle that sells for, say, $130,000 has been won by, through open tender, for $220,000. So what is going to happen is that that company will have no choice, going by the rules of the procurement game, will have no choice than to award that contract to this bidder at $220,000. And that entity will have been seen to have followed all the rules and regulations and the process required under our law. So, my brother, I'm telling you that, yes, we all agree that the default method under our procurement regime is the open competition. But I can also assure you that it is not always the case that the open competitive bidding brings up economic value.
Mr. Martin, let me pause and rectify the technical challenge, and then I'll come back to you. Apparently, the sound is not. Viewers are complaining about the sound. I mean, you wanted to react to something?
Yeah, I mean, look, clearly, I'm sorry the viewers are not listening properly, well, they're hearing properly, but we were hearing. Yeah. And he was saying that it's not always the case that open competitive bidding gives you the best. It's akin to suggesting that cost is not equal to quality, because sometimes, depending on how much you actually put in, or how much eventually is bidded.
But I said it's the law.
Yeah, but that's a wrong law. Well, you see, you see, let me tell you something. Because the law says that...
Let me explain something to the viewers, and then you come in. Yeah. Now, Mr. Watson is saying that if they do an open bid, and let's say, for instance, he used a V8, for example. He said, you know, a V8 on the market is approximately, let's say, $130,000. And they do an open bid. Like 6, 5, 8 companies bid, but the lowest bidder was $220,000. So they have no choice but to give the contract to the company that bid $220,000, even
Yeah,
though everybody knows on the market it's 130, but those who bid.
No, and that's fraudulent. You see,
Well, but with the law, you can't go and negotiate.
The law says, but so let me tell you, that's how the process gets rigged. Because you can do restrictive tendering and ensure that only 4 people actually come and then come and put in bids around that same figure. You can eliminate people. You should also tell us the back end of this particular provision. Well, it doesn't seem to make sense to suggest that you do an open competitive bidding and you don't compare values on the market. It doesn't work that way at all. Well,
he's saying that the law doesn't allow him to go and negotiate with the guy who came.
No.
You go and say, look, drop your
price.
That is
why, in order to believe him, we should have all of this publicized. Because when you put a bid for a V8...
Oh, if he's saying the law, I mean, you're not saying...
No, but the law doesn't... The people can shortchange the law. He's saying to you that the law says the lowest bidder.
Yes.
How do you know that the lowest bidder was not actually $110,000 instead of the 130 and 220,000?
No, but you're changing there.
No, I get your point.
All things being equal, assuming he's giving us the facts.
No, this is a scenario.
Yeah.
You gave a scenario. Let's say the V8 costs $130,000, and he's saying that if they do open competitive bidding, and the person and they did the process, and the person with the lowest was 220,000, then we give it to that person, even though we know that on the open market value is 130,000. What prevents him and his team from actually comparing market prices as well?
The law does not allow him to negotiate with the bidder. Unfortunately, I don't have the law here.
No, it's not about the law.
I'm not being fair to my...
Look, GCNet does that. I just give you an example. GCNet says, listen, if you bring your values, people have been shortchanging the system.
But GCNet is not procurement agency.
No,
they are
I'm
just evaluating.
But this is the common sense aspect of the law. The law is saying the lowest value. Because we do not know the people who actually put in the bids, because we don't, that process is still opaque from the PPA, and they should tell us how many of these deals have been properly transparent anyway. Let's dissect the issues here. Nana, PPA is being asked to buy V8, right? Yeah. These are V8s not made from mass. They are made in the world by companies. On the open market, if you Google right now, you see the values. He's saying to us that because the law says even if you did open competitive bidding and the person with the lowest figure, you go for it. And in this case, in the case of V8, if the V8 price is 130,000 on the market, but the people who put in the bid put the lowest was 220,000, we should give it to the lowest bidder because that's what the law says. And I'm submitting to you that the law does not prevent you from also thinking beyond what has been brought to you, to look beyond and ask yourself, how much do these things cost? Otherwise, they'll break the bank. Then the whole country will become bankrupt, if that's the case.
Well, that's why.
And it could actually create a cabal, because what it means is that 10, 15 people can put in the bid, and they can do kanana and say, okay, and they can restrict the tender and say, okay, we got the lowest bidder for 230,000, so we gave it to the person.
See, until we change the law.
It's not the law. There's nothing wrong with the law. I'm saying the law is saying lowest bidder. It doesn't say in his example, which is very, 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 very bad example, by the way. He's trying to submit that all of a sudden, all processes to cross-check cost beyond what has been put in the bid should be abandoned. I mean, why should this be the case? Would he use his personal money that way? If assuming he was going to buy a V8.
No, but it's the law.
It's not the law.
You can't go and sit there and say, look, I don't like this law, so I won't abide by it.
No, then there's nothing wrong with the law regarding competitive bidding.
He's saying that he's not allowed to negotiate with the company that is selling.
It's not about negotiation. It's about asking questions. That's where the tender evaluation committee comes in. Because the tender board will say, my brother, you say your V8 is costing 220,000. You are the lowest bidder. But we've looked across the world, and we've seen that it is 130,000. So give us the bill of quantities that got you to 220,000 if you are the lowest bidder. You kick out the whole process because you know the market price, and then call fresh bids. You cannot suggest to us one time. In fact, this conversation is rich because
can you imagine? Can you think that maybe this clause was put in there so that he cannot equally go back and say, look, Charlie, the thing is 130 or you bid 80, so put 130 there. Assuming the buyer could maybe he knows Mr. Toyota.
Nobody is asking him to do that. What I'm saying is that if you are protecting the public purse and a commodity that is supposed to be bought, has been priced at 220,000. But you know, and that's the work of the tender evaluation panel, which should do that. They should know that they should compare costs. Otherwise, Nana, what he's actually telling you is that if 10 people put in a bid and the lowest is $1 million, because it's the law says going for the lowest bidder, you just agree like that without having recourse to the fact that there are comparator prices you can actually see.
Okay, so Franklin,
maybe that's not what he's actually communicating, so we may have to be fair to him.
But I heard it clear.
Yeah.
But see, I'm saying that this law, assuming I put in a bid for $80,000 for the same car, because Mr. Toyota is my friend.
Yes.
Are you saying this guy can, if this law is not there, then he can call me and say, look, Nana, the street value is 130, so jack it up to 130 because it's fine. No. Because then he's negotiating with me.
He doesn't need to do all of that. You see, the procurement process and the tender process.
Okay, he's back on the line, so let's get something clear here. Mr. Ejanim Boating.
Yes.
Well, there's been a big discussion going on as we're getting the thing correctly. Now, if I can hear you, if I can, what I was explaining to my viewers, let me get it correctly, is that the law says that once we have submitted our bids, let's say 4 or 5 bids, and I put in the 220 as you quoted, you can't negotiate with me on the price that I quoted as to whether to take it up or down.
Yeah.
And that is the law.
Yes.
Okay. So
my question to Mr. Jaden, sorry.
So
I wanted to ask him.
Okay. Franklin, I'm in studio with Franklin Cudjoe, and he wanted to just throw a question in there.
Yeah.
Okay. So Mr. Jaden Boatin, if I heard you correctly, so there are bids for, let's say, V8, whose market value is, let's say, $100,000. But when the bid was done, the people who put in the bid, the lowest was $220,000. Okay, it's a suggestion that because the lowest bidder here is $220,000, we go for that person without recourse to what we know, or probably what the panel should actually go beyond and find out what the real cost is on the market.
Yes, that is what I was explaining. Which panel are you talking about here?
But they're usually evaluation panel. Yeah, I'm talking about the tender process. Usually the tender
panel.
Sorry, go ahead.
The panel, which is the evaluation panel, have no right under the law, under the regulation in our current law, to make changes to any bid which is before them for evaluation.
Right.
All right?
That's
now,
right.
What happens? What happens is that we have various clauses in the tender document. Okay, those clauses are remedied. We have entrenched clauses, and we have clauses that are subject to variation, which we call the tender detachment. Now, there is a clause in every tender document, which is the document that provides the guidelines and instructions for bidders to be guided in their tender or in their bidding. Now, there is one clause that gives the buying entity, we call that clause the exit clause. And that clause says that the entity, the buying entity, has right to reject a bid or all bids without any obligation to the bidders for reasons that is best known to them. And for that matter, the only remedy that an entity has in the given circumstances, the scenario I just explained, is for them to cancel the entire tender process. The reason is that they cannot negotiate. But then we realize that the price, the lowest price, is way beyond the open market price, or for that matter, their estimated price, because every organization buys by first having to get an initial budget with which it is going into the procurement. So they might have had an initial budget of about 150,000, and here they are in the open tender with the lowest bidder of 220. The only exit clause they can apply under the circumstance is to cancel the entire tender.
Good.
Now, if they cancel the entire tender, what do? They cannot call any person on one-on-one and say, please, we've canceled the tender, so come, let me award you this contract to go and supply me at 150. When they cancel the tender, they have another option. The other option is to adopt a restricted tender. The restricted tender will then be they selecting 3 or 4 or 5 or maximum 6, some of which will include those who took part in the tender or a new set of bidders altogether, and apply to PPA to be granted permission to use restricted tender to do that. In that case, they come to PPA with an estimated tender price. And PPA will grant them that approval based on PPA's own market research, which will confirm the estimated price or otherwise. Because normally, when we find out that the estimated price they have quoted for PPA to give them the approval is far beyond the market price, before they even go into the tender, PPA is able to tell them that our market research reveals that that tender estimated price you have given is overboard. So reduce it by this percentage prior to even going for the tender. In that case, the buying entity is well informed that they cannot go and do a tender and end up with a price beyond that which has been approved by the procurement authority. But in the case of the open tender, even if they have their own estimated price, apart from cancelling the entire process, their only option is to go for what they call the lowest valued bidder. Okay. But let me come in this way, because this whole topic has to do with value for money. So in giving you this scenario, I'm trying to tell you the challenges we have under our current procurement dispensation. And I'm telling you that we as regulators, we have observed this kind of trend, and we are considering, putting up a request for amendment to our law, because the World Bank has also noticed this kind of situation over the years, and now the World Bank has come out with their new procedures where they allow bidding entities to request tenderers to come back after the initial tender with what they call their best tender price. So in that case, what is going to happen is that when you are finished with the tender process and you have arrived at the lowest valuated bidder, you then go back and ask the 3 lowest bidders, the first, second, third, and then ask them that you now want them to come back again with their lowest bid. In which case, you can even get the 3rd lowest bidder coming up top with the lowest bid. That is the angle we want to go. But we don't have an amended law yet to this scenario. And so far as our current laws are concerned, the entities do not have this right to cancel or to even call for these bidders to ask them to bring their best prices, as the World Bank has been able to do. So we are coming from the angle to say that, listen, what we can do as a regulator is that whereas we don't have control over the open tender system, because if you want to do an open competitive bid, you do not need DPA's permission to do open tender. But then when you want to do restricted tender and you want to do sole source, then PPA has the right to first determine and ensure that the price for which you want to go and enter under those procurement methods, we will conduct our due diligence to establish appropriate price to grant you the approval to proceed. So currently, the only place or the only method or the only case or the only situation that we are able to conduct value for money in our procurement is where people have applied for restricted tender or for sole source. We are able to do massive and elaborate due diligence and value for money to get the entities to go by what we have come out from our market survey at the most appropriate price. That is what I can say for now.
Okay. Well, Mr. Jenny, thank you very much for the explanation. I suspect that you are suggesting that you are handicapped as Public Procurement Authority. You have no recourse to change the process at all, except maybe the contracting or the buying entity that would then eventually say, well, listen, we don't believe in these figures because we've seen the open market prices anyway. If that's what's being communicated, it sounds fair. But I would also suggest to you that I suspect that you should be writing opinions. I don't know if you are not allowed to write opinions on what has been brought to you, to say that, well, listen, we've also had recourse to some of the cost, and you may be minded to look at these things, or you think the Central Tender Committee usually should do that. That's one. Secondly, wouldn't this be cured, especially in the public sector, by the Attorney General? Usually the Attorney Generals give opinions, advice on contract, and I've seen some of them where they actually say that we think the price is actually too high. So maybe that can also be cured. And possibly the Auditor General may be the last recourse, where we do pre-auditing of these contracts as well. But otherwise, what Mr. Jenim Boati is saying is frightening to the extent that the public entity that is contracting or buying can decide without recourse to anybody at all that they are fine with a particular price. And that is where the conduit for short-changing the system happens. Having said that, though, I don't know if Mr. Jenim Boati is ready to answer questions on Kearney GVG, because I'm told that that contract came to them as a restricted tender. Did you see any tender documents beyond just Kearney GVG?
You asking me whether we saw any tender document for the Kearney GVG?
Yes, please.
Yes, they applied for the use of restricted tendering.
And how
we
many
do not influence, just a moment. They applied to PPA to use restricted tendering method. They did submit 4 names, 4 companies. And I believe you know that PPA do not have any influence as to the selection of a shortlist of firms which are submitted to PPA for consideration and approval. So what we know from PPA is that the ministry applied to use restricted tendering method, but as I've just told you, the process of tendering, after they have received approval from PPA, moves beyond PPA and end up with the Central Tender Review Board for concurrent approval.
So did you see the 4 companies, tender documents of the 4 companies?
No, we don't see the tender documents. We just see the names and the profile, because they are only coming to seek permission to use restricted tendering method. And that means that upon approval from PPA, they then have to go and prepare their tender document and invite these companies to tender. After that process, PPA does not come into the picture. They will proceed, and when they are done with their evaluation report, they then submit it to the Central Tender Review Board for them to review it and grant them concurrent approval where applicable.
Okay, let me give you one more question.
Yeah, one more question, and thanks for the indulgence. So we know from the Central Tender Committee's response to us when we asked them that we should ask the PPA for the tender document. So it appears that probably there are no documents at all. But I won't let you deal with those matters. I think these are matters beyond you. We'll deal with it in the court. Thank you.
My next question is how do we solve the issue of transparency? Because anytime government goes through a deal, there's so much suspicion, the media will jump on board. And, is there any way of letting the public know that, listen, this is what happened, these are the fair prices, be done with it? Can we deal with the issue of transparency and suspicion?
In fact, our procurement process is supposed to be a very transparent one. And I think what we need to do, or maybe what the public needs to know, is for the public to also, as it were, fish out to understand how the processes work. So that, for instance, if people come to PP and they want to know how this DBT procurement, was undertaken. It is a misplaced, direction because PPA does not get involved in the procurement. Apart from what I've just told you, that they might have just applied PPA to use a method. But the processes of procurement stays with the entity. So the entity has got the name of the bidder, the entity has got the bidding document, the entity has got the bid which were submitted by these entities, by these companies. The entity has got a copy of the evaluation report. The entity actually holds every information. So for me, I believe that if the civil society and the public really wants to get to understand how these procurement processes are concerned, are undertaken, they need to hold the entities responsible because we are operating a transparent procurement regime.
It's true.
So these processes that I've explained, they are not secret. They are information that must be made available on request. But once they have applied to use, a restricted tendering, don't you have a rep on the board that makes sure that everything is going on fine? I mean, don't you have a rep on the board? On which board? On, whichever entity, assuming, Communications Ministry applied to you to use restricted tendering, don't you send an officer to go and sit in the tendering process to make sure that they abide by what they said they were going to do? Yes, you see, that again comes to education of how much or to what extent the public is informed about the structures of our procurement system. In every procurement entity, we have what we call an entity tender committee. These entity tender committees are men and women who are supposed to be men and women of dignity and credibility. And that is how our procurement system has been structured. These men and women making up the entity tender committee are made up of some key officials of the entity, a representative from the Attorney General, a representative of the sector ministry, if it is not the ministry itself and it is an agency, a representative of the sector ministry must be on board, must be part of that entity tender committee. So you have all this composition well structured, and it is expected that they will do the necessary due diligence when the procurement is brought before them, for them to decide on whether or not to grant approval. Now, these structures are supposed to complement the efforts of the regulator, which is PPA, because PPA cannot be everywhere to monitor and to, as it were, vouch for compliance of the procedure. But these entity tender committees are in every single entity. My brother, we have about 1,000 procurement entities under the application of this law. And each single one of these entities have got a 9-member composition of this entity tender committee, whose business is to review the evaluation report submitted by the evaluation panel for them to adjudicate and critically examine these information placed before them before they grant approval. And that is where they can take the decision, as I told you, that if they have observed that there is a report from the evaluation committee to buy a car which is sold at 130 on the market, and it is the lowest bidder is going for 220,000, this entity tender committee has got the right to stop the procurement. Thank you very much. We are working for and on behalf to complement the efforts of the procurement authority. Sure. Mr. Jimmy, I want to take a quick break here, and then when I come back, I want to find out two things. I don't know, maybe it's not in the law, but can there be any purchases over $50 million or a certain amount, if thing is big enough, that PPA gets involved in whichever committee? I mean, it's not like if they're going to buy pens, go and sit in there, but at a certain threshold, should we get PPA involved? What he's saying to you and us is that their remit is after the evaluation committees within the entity that is procuring has actually done their work. Let me take a quick break and come back. Well, thank you very much for staying and sending all the insightful messages. Thank you very much. But let me start with Franklin. Franklin, the PPA seems to be like a very, very good handicapped institution.
Excessively handicapped. In fact, in this case, what Mr. Jenny Boache is saying is that depending on the integrity of the panel that does the evaluation of the bids within the various entity, the procuring entity, we are doomed. Because his remit is to just say, well, are you coming to do sole sourcing or restricted tender? Restricted tender, I don't need to know the tender documents or the four. In this case, Kearney GVG. Just tell me who you have given the contract to, then I give the go-ahead. That's sad. Because I suspect that the PPA, and he's asking us to help him, actually, to change the law.
It's a clarion call.
It's a clarion call.
But you see,
so
the one
PPA
question I put was, should the PPA be involved? If we should agree on a threshold, maybe after 10 million, you know.
Well, maybe the PPA should not. What can be done in this case is that if there are projects of a certain value, right, that's where the government entity, some assessors would come on board and say, okay, go through the process. If the figure eventually we see is beyond what we think should be the case, we call out the contract and say, no, it shouldn't happen. But these are grave times, because what he just said in the case of Kearney GVG is that they don't have the documents. Meanwhile, the minister and the deputy have been telling us that we should go to PPA. The documents are there. I can safely submit that there was no tender document. This thing was cooked somewhere and then just handed. No. But you see, the word cooked is not, I'm not using it in a very negative manner.
You know, because unless it is proven, let's just presume that it's there, but they've refused to show it.
All right, well, he says the remit is not, they don't.
Maybe
so if the minister is telling you that, actually that's why they can't locate the document. They wrote to us saying, we are locating the documents. After $178 million signed, you don't know where the documents are.
They will find it. But, I mean, so going forward, I mean, how much more can we review this law? Because you see, Mr. Johnny Boatin is saying that all these institutions have competent men of repute and everything, but they branded buses. We had stories from SNATE. You know,
he's
procurement in all these.
Well, he's submitting that, and those are very advocacy points he mentions, which we need to take up and help him. He's actually saying that these entities are otherwise supposed to be made up of men of steel, right, who know their marbles. We don't get to know these members anyway, so we should now insist that the tender committees, evaluation panels must be made public on any project that has significant impact on the economy. We should know the members, their backgrounds, because they cannot be procurement, they cannot be evaluating every project. Every project has got technical specifications, especially in the case of Kearney GVG. You need people with sound technical, mobile, engineering to understand what is being brought to them, so they can understand architecture. We need to know, publicize the panel members, the criteria, and then have a certificate. It is just so needed. That in this case, we need to do that. Look, Obama, when he was trying to do his reconstruction stuff, any value beyond 20,000 units, he said, put it up in the website. It's open. Everybody can put a bid from any part of the world, of course, mostly American. We know the contractors, the subcontractors. In some cases, we even know the evaluation panel. I told you, not long ago in this studio, that the film War Dogs was actually based on a true story, where two young Americans won the bid to supply arms worth $300 million to Pentagon. Two young Americans. Meanwhile, other multinational, very rich companies put in bids. They couldn't win. But these two young guys won the bid because it was made open, public. But you know why? What happened later? When they put in the bid and won, they found out that they procured fake Chinese bullets for the Pentagon. And they were found out and punished. Here, nothing happens. But not in this Kearney GVG matter. We'll locate the document, we'll find the people who did the tender document, who did the tendering, if they exist, and we'll ask for questions.
Well, all too soon, that's what time would allow us, but this issue will come back again to find out how much more can we tighten this law? How much more can we make it transparent so that there won't be a tussle? You can just pick up a phone or pick up your dailies and know that, look, these are A companies, bidding to provide an electricity plant or a water plant or some cars, and these are the prices they've offered and which one we went for and why. That will be the day, the transparency, so that we reduce the suspicion and the partisan fighting. But as I say, we'll be back to do this all over again. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure as always.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you.